Hello, class. I'm back. We've arrived at the point where Susan Wolf introduces the myth of Sisyphus, and that was your discussion topic for this week. There's still time to post something today for full credit, and I will accept discussion posts up until Sunday for partial credit. And then, of course, there is the quiz that you need to complete before Sunday as well. Okay, let's before we continue with the slideshow, I just also want to say, start thinking about your first essay topic. I will introduce that next week, and you'll have some time, plenty of time to complete a final draft. But the first stages will be writing an introduction and then submitting a rough draft. So begin thinking about a topic. Okay, I'll be asking you to write about one of the readings from the Ethical Life, and you'll also have to make reference to one of the 4 chapters that we've read from Schaefer-Landau's The Fundamentals of Ethics. So you don't have to write about all of the readings, but think about whether you're interested in the Wolf essay on meaning, or are you more interested in the Heathwood essay on desire satisfaction, or Hooker's objective list theory, or do you want to go back to Mill and Epicurus and think about hedonism as a measure of well-being? The question of value: what is it that we're seeking in the good life? What makes life good? What's the nature of happiness? Those are some of the questions that we've been talking about the first few weeks, and that's what I'll ask you to write about in your essay. But there'll be choices to make, and I will share topics with you next week. But over the weekend, you can begin taking some notes and coming up with topic questions, ideas of your own. The goal is to defend a thesis, to make an argument, and we'll talk more about that next week. Okay. So putting myself again down into the lower part of the screen and coming back to this slide, the case of Sisyphus. Okay, we're thinking about what makes a life meaningful and the extent to which meaningfulness or meaning contributes to one's own good, right? It's ultimately related to the question of self-interest. Can I promote my own good? Can I act in my own self-interest without striving to make my life more meaningful? Okay. Well, let's think about the case of Sisyphus. It's an ancient Greek myth. He did some dastardly deeds, and the gods punished him. And this was his punishment in the underworld. He would spend eternity pushing a rock up to the top of the mountain, and then at the very last moment, he would lose, when he's approaching the top, he would lose his energy, and the rock would roll all the way back down to the bottom, and then he would start over the next day, wake up the next day, push the rock back up the mountain. That's the life of Sisyphus. It's supposed to be a metaphor for, one way of looking at human existence. We're born, we go to school, we find a profession, we get a job, and then we begin the routine of getting up in the morning, going to work, coming home, eating dinner, going to bed, up again, go to work, make money, buy a nicer house, get more stuff for yourself, fall in love, get married, raise a family, and then you're going to work to make money, to pay for your family, get old, you keep going to work, at some point you retire, but it's just one thing after another. Routine. What's it all for? Our lives, we wouldn't describe our lives when we look at the fine details, our lives don't look like the lives of Sisyphus, but I don't know, what's really the ultimate purpose of life? What's it all for? Is it just like pushing a rock up the hill only to have to, watch it roll down again and push it up again? Okay, so that raises the question of what is the meaning or the purpose of a life, and what makes it more or less meaningful, and why or how does that matter to us, right? Why or how do we value the meaningfulness of our lives? I think one way to and so Wolf is asking the question, is Sisyphus's life meaningful? And that's one question. We could also ask the question, is Sisyphus happy? Well, most of us, I think, if we're given this this punishment by the gods. On day one in the underworld, we'd be miserable. But imagine over time, Sisyphus gets used to it. And he takes a sort of Zen approach to the activity. He's kind of he lives in the present. Every day he's really focused on the task and he gets good at it. Like he develops a talent and a skill and he gets really involved in the process and he comes to like it. Like he takes pleasure in pushing that rock up the hill. And at the end of the day, he feels good about his accomplishment. I pushed that rock up the hill. And then the next day he does the same thing, but he takes pleasure in it. So imagine Sisyphus happy. Okay, enjoying this existence. Is that enough to make his life good? Right? Is he advancing his own good by pushing this rock up and down the hill? It makes him happy. It gives him pleasure. He's enjoying it. But is that sufficient? Is that enough to make his life good? And Wolf kind of uses this example to suggest that there's something missing. Well, what is missing from his life? Well, meaning, okay? It doesn't look like his life is meaningful. It's pointless. So even though he might be happy, it's not as good a life as it could be, right? I mean, that he's happy contributes to his welfare. It makes it better than a life of misery. Certainly a happy life is better than a miserable life, okay? So for Wolf, one's own good can be measured in degrees. It's not an all or nothing affair. And certainly that Sisyphus is happy makes his life better. But her point is that it would be even better if it was meaningful. So what makes a life meaningful? Well, it has to be more, she thinks, than just being engaged in a task. Because Sisyphus is engaged in a task. He's got stuff that he's doing, but it doesn't seem meaningful from Wolf's perspective. Right, so these are Wolf's starting points. What makes a life meaningful? Can a life be good without being meaningful? Can a person act self-interestedly and advance her own good without securing meaning or promoting meaningful activity within it? Okay, those are her central questions. Here's Susan Wolf. Again, I like pictures. This is her at a conference on value theory presenting a paper called Meaning in Life. Okay, or I think this is from a podcast, The Philosophical Life. There she is. Here's how she defines meaning. Again, it's important to define your terms. Meaningful lives are lives of active engagement in projects of worth. Sorry, meaningful lives. This is on page 56. Are lives of active engagement in projects of worth. So this is from Wolf's article titled Happiness and Meaning, Two Aspects of the Good Life. Right? So she's focusing on meaning, but she's also going to talk about happiness. She thinks they're independent of each other, right? So in focusing on meaning on page 56, when we say a life is meaningful for Wolf, we mean that it's an active life, a life in which you're actively engaged in projects of worth, right? So the word worth there adds an objective component, right? There's a subjective aspect to the meaningfulness of a life, right? My life is only meaningful insofar as I, the subject, am engaged in it. But just being engaged in my life doesn't all by itself make it meaningful. The projects have to have some objective worth or value in order for my life to be fully meaningful. So meaning arises, as she puts it on 59, when subjective attraction, that's the subjective component, right? Meaningfulness of my life depends on my desires and my attitude toward my life and how engaged I am in it, right? But that's not sufficient, right? There also has to be objective attractiveness. What I'm doing has to have some objective worth or value in order for it to be meaningful. It's not enough just to be attracted to it, okay? So where are we? Okay, we got some time. I'm not gonna spend as much time on the remaining slides. You can think about these yourself as you think about Wolf. And the Wolf article might be something interesting to write about for your first paper, thinking about the relationship between meaning and happiness and how they contribute to the goodness of a person's life. Here's her central question. Does meaning come from the experience of fulfillment, no matter what its cause? Right? Okay, if the answer is yes, that what makes my life meaningful is that I experience it as fulfilling. And it doesn't really matter what the cause of that fulfillment is, just as long as I have the inner experience of feeling fulfilled, my life is meaningful. That would make meaning merely subjective. right? In the way that welfare is subjective for Heathwood. As long as it feels like I'm satisfying my desires, my life is going better, according to Heathwood, because welfare is a merely subjective state, right? The preference theorist could give a similar account of meaning, right? As long as it feels like my life is fulfilled, or the hedonist, right? Maybe this is a more hedonistic account. As long as it feels like my life is fulfilling, then it's meaningful. Doesn't matter what the cause of that feeling is, right? Or that's one question, right? And if you answer yes, that would mean you think of meaning as a subjective quality. Or is a meaningful life one in which a subject is fulfilled by activities suitable to the experience, where it's not just that I feel a sense of fulfillment, but my fulfillment is, I don't know, justified, or I kind of really have earned it because what I'm doing is sort of merits a feeling of fulfillment, a feeling of achievement, because I've really accomplished something. I'm engaged in something that really matters, not just to me, but to others. So that would make meaning a more objective quality, where, right, the question of whether my life is more or less meaningful is not just a question of how fulfilled I feel on the inside, but whether the activities and the projects that I'm engaged in are are worthy of my pursuit, right? Okay. So here's a way of determining how subjective you think meaning is, or, on the spectrum. Is meaning a more objective quality or a more subjective quality of a person's life? Well, think about the example she gives is on page 64 of someone whose life, her attitude toward her own life changes. So imagine a woman who was at an earlier stage in her life blissfully in love, and then she discovers that the man she loved has been using her in some way, has been lying to her, has been cheating on her, however you want to imagine that. Okay, so imagine that person, right? She has this moment where she just makes this discovery, and it alters her attitude or her judgment of her life, of the life that she's living. Okay, so the question to ask is, well, has she experienced a loss? She lost something. If so, what has she lost? Has she lost a degree of meaningfulness? Has her life become less meaningful, knowing that she just spent 20 years with a man that she thought loved her, but turned out didn't really love her? Now, when she reflects on that 20 years, right, she experiences a feeling of loss in her own life. What has she lost? Has she lost a sense that the last 20 years of her life were meaningful? Well, okay, that's, I think, one way to think about it. But then what is that? What is that degree of meaningfulness that she's lost? Is it just the feeling of happiness, or the feeling of being fulfilled? Is it just that, like, her life is no longer feels fulfilling or enjoyable? Or just the sense that her desires are no longer being satisfied? Is that all that she's lost? Right? If so, right, then what she's lost is purely subjective. So if all she loses in discovering this man has been lying to her, if all she loses is a feeling of enjoyment, or a feeling of fulfillment, right, or the feeling that her desires are being satisfied, then she's just lost something subjective. Or has she lost something independent of that and valuable in its own right? Right? Like, not just that my life is less fulfilling and less enjoyable, that my desires are not being satisfied, but like my life is just, it's less valuable, in the sense it's less meaningful, independently of those inner feelings that I have, right? That would make meaning more objective, if that's what she feels that she's lost, if that's the best way to describe what she's lost. Okay, so we're running out of time. I hope that was useful, and that's the end of the slideshow, and we can talk more about all this next week. Okay, bye.